Okay, we can go ahead and get started. So I'll just give like 30 seconds of intro and then we can continue with you, Dr. Sundari.
Yeah,
okay?
Good.
Namaskar, everybody. Greetings, everyone. Today has been one special day because WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram were down for all day long. Everything is back now, so back to normal. Welcome you all to the Sita Goel Centenary Exposition series. The whole series is being done by Dr. Els. Those who are joining us new, just a brief introduction to Sita Goel in case of those who are not aware, and of course of Dr. Els. So Sita Goel is considered the father of India's intellectual freedom struggle. So you are familiar with the political freedom struggle, but there has been an intellectual freedom struggle, and both Sitaram Goelji and also Dr. Els have been freedom fighters, you can say, in setting India and Indians free of colonial hold. So in this series, this is the second session, and we will be covering today Islam, Ghazwa Hind, and iconoclasm. So with that, Dr. Els, over to you.
All right, I'm first going to give a very short PowerPoint and then we can discuss like that. That's better. Okay, you have the screen there?
Yes.
Okay, fine. So to start where we left off, it's in the early 60s that Sitaram Goel goes into business and starts this this company for book import and export and also publishing, namely Biblia Impex, from which he retired. He didn't wind up the business, but he retired and left it to his sons, especially Pradeep Goel, to continue the business. And he himself set up a small publishing outfit called Voice of India. Then just at that time, his friend K.R. Malkani, who was the editor of Organizer, the RSS Weekly, invited him to write a weekly column. Just before that, and this may have been a factor, of course, Goelji himself, through Biblia Impex, had published a book by Malkani, namely The RSS Story. So it's a laudatory, well, let's say a hagiography of the RSS by Malkani. I knew Malkani, he was a very fine gentleman. He also always made sure that I had free access to offices of the BJP and RSS, at that time still like essentially one outfit. They've grown apart later when the scent of power got its influence on the BJP. So he was a very nice man, but he was also given to nice stories about Islam, stories that made the problem of Islam not that serious. Like, for instance, he believed, he did not invent it himself, I think, but he believed the claim that Muhammad had spoken favorably about the country after which his principal enemy, Hind, the first lady of the city of Mecca, was named. You see, she was named Hind after India. It's a fairly typical case in girls' names to be named after wealth and opulence. Like in English, you have the name Kimberly after the diamond mine. And so Hind evoked for Arabs the glories of India, which to them was a great civilizational center, a center of science also. And so he believed that Muhammad had spoken favorably of Hind on the occasion of the defeat and submission ultimately of the Meccans. Now, this story is completely confabulated. Muhammad had no soft corner for India. Anyway, but Malkani was quite open-minded. I mean, there are many more determinedly pro-Islamic leaders in the RSS, especially ever since. But so he was not at all a Hindu fanatic and Islamophobic and so on, not at all. But he did allow Goelji, for a while at least, to produce articles critical of Islam, deconstructing Islam, making the case against Islam on the basis of its own history. Though that didn't take very long, a few years later, intervention by the RSS leadership made Malkani ask Goelji to stop publishing. And so just as before, they didn't want to offend Nehru, this time clearly they didn't want to offend Islam. Right, now anyway, as long as it lasted, he published a number of series of articles, and each of these series was bundled in a booklet published by this new outfit, Voice of India. The first one was Defense of Hindu Society. This we will deal with in another session. The second one was called Islamic Imperialism, or the Story of Islamic Imperialism in India. So that's the first one we will deal with. The second one is Heroic Hindu Resistance to Muslim Invaders. In 1984, this was published, and the next year, Muslim Separatism, Causes and Consequences. And then another one I have to mention in this context, this was not published in the organizer, the Hindu temples, What Happened to Them, in 2 volumes. The first one contains the facts. It contains a list of almost 2,000 mosques standing on destroyed Hindu temples, or places where Hindu temples were destroyed and not replaced. And so anyway, cases of Islamic iconoclasm against Hindu temples. And then in the second volume, he goes into the Islamic evidence for this iconoclasm, and especially the doctrine behind it, the reason why Islamic rulers tended to do this. And so the philosophy behind this is the following, why did Goelji have to go into this rather unpleasant material? Why rake up negative memories? You see, one of the very common defenses, especially among common Hindus, against this serious study of Islam is that we should let bygones be bygones. Now, to this Goelji said, an ideological battle has to be waged in order to avoid the other battle, the physical battle. Societies which fail to fight an ideological battle, which refuse to repel ideological aggression, invite physical aggression sooner or later. If ideological aggression is not stopped, a society gets taken for granted and physical aggression follows. That's in fact the philosophy behind all of Goel's critical work. Some people in Wikipedia and so on call him an extremist. And the word extremism, of course, has been tainted by its association with Islamic terrorism. And so people think, oh, if he's an extremist, he must be violent, he must be behind, what they call it nowadays, Islamophobia, you know, anti-Muslim hatred and so on. You see, this is all beside the point. I mean, this is simply not true. An ideological battle can best be compared to the attitude of a school teacher wielding the red pencil when correcting the homework handed in by his pupils. You see, a teacher who sees a mistake and corrects it and marks it as a mistake does not hate the mistake he is correcting. He just sees that it is a mistake. And much less does he hate the pupil whose work he corrects. You see, this should not be emotionalized. And the way that nowadays the woke crowd is personalizing and emotionalizing everything. No, you see, this is a doctrine that you're dealing with. That which unites all Muslims is loyalty to a particular doctrine. Now, we're not concerned with those Muslims. In second order, of course, we will look into their record in a nuanced, differentiated way without generalizations. But one thing can absolutely be generalized. That which makes the Muslim community into one community, namely their common loyalty to Islam. Now, this doctrine common to them, that can certainly be inspected and criticized. And so there is no element of aggression in this. This is simply a job to do. Now we're going to look into these books more in detail. And from here onwards, any question, especially if you don't understand something or if you need more details or something, you can interrupt me for questions. You can use the chat function, for example. Okay, so this first book, The Story of Islamic Imperialism. Well, this is a later edition, the one you see now. They were, for contemporary standards, pretty shabby looking in their first edition. But okay, this story of Islamic imperialism is really a series of comments on new guidelines about history books published by the National Council for Educational Research and Training, pertaining especially to dealing with the communal conflict in the Middle Ages. And so this, these guidelines say explicitly that the conflict between Hindus and Muslims should be minimized and avoided as a topic. And when at all necessary, should as much as possible be explained in non-communal, non-religious terms. The latter element, of course, is a consequence of the Marxist persuasion that only economic aspects of a matter are real. The rest is a bourgeois superstructure, as it is called, built on top of the basic economic facts. That is why, for example, all kinds of contortions are used to make credible that the religious factor of iconoclasm, of destroying false religion and false gods, was not present when Muslim rulers took over and destroyed temples. They say, oh, it was only the wealth in the temples that attracted them. It was just to to help their state finances that they took all the gold and so on. Well, this is of course a very hard thing to believe. You know, why then would they have destroyed the temples? Why not let the temple worship continue so that people would continue to donate their wealth to these temples, and then the wealth would be ready to be plundered again? No, that's not what they did. They destroyed temples, including temples that did not house any wealth. So, you know, this is a very contorted explanation, but it does follow very simple from the Marxist assumptions that only economy is real. As for the first element in the guidelines, that this conflict should be minimized as much as possible or explained away, is that it creates harmony to see the past in rosy terms, through rosy glasses, and that emphasizing the element of conflict would only generate conflict in the present. Like I've heard testimonies from people who were civil servants at the time, precisely in these departments dealing with the history textbooks. And so any protest about, yeah, but you know, the facts of history are sacred, comments, of course, interpretations that comes later, but the facts themselves can't be tampered with. You see, they were sidelined or promoted away or something gently, but at any rate, they were kept away from this particular policy because those who announced this policy really believed in it. They really thought that harmony would be helped onwards by precisely remaining silent about the conflicts in the past. Now here we should counterpose something that didn't exist yet when Goelji wrote this booklet, namely the South African Truth and Reconciliation Commission. You see, in order to get reconciliation, in order to finally institute harmony, you have to look into the trouble spots in the past. And you have to come clean about that. Of course, there is a little difference. You see, South African whites had already developed serious doubt about the apartheid system beforehand. And their white brethren in England, America, and so on were already exercising pressure on them to drop this. They were not showing any white solidarity and so on. So whites themselves have developed great doubts about the correctness of racism. So from there on, to take the step of looking into that racist past and disowning it is not such a big step anymore. In the case of Muslims and Islam, well, if they look into the crimes that the Muslim community has committed, motivated by Islam, then you'll have to question the legitimacy of Islam itself. which is precisely what unites them, what makes them into a separate community. You see, blacks and whites are born that way. They will also die black or white. You see, this is simply a given. Whereas Islam is not so simple. You see, Islam you can disown, Islam you can grow out of. And to start with, Islam, you have to indoctrinate into it. You see, nobody is born a Muslim. And so in this case, you see, what this would end up doing is to delegitimize Islam in the eyes of Muslims. And so many will logically conclude that this process of reconciliation ultimately requires of them that they abandon Islam itself. Some will accept this. You see, some will see this as growth, as outgrowing a belief system of the past. Others, however, are going to fiercely protest. And in the modern world, they're also going to be supported by all the Islamophiles outside the Muslim community. In fact, they are fiercer about it. They don't know exactly what Islam is. They only know that it shouldn't be criticized. And about that, they are absolutely adamant. Like after 9/11, after the bomb attacks in Paris, in Brussels, and so on, there was a lineup of politicians visiting mosques and assuring Muslims that they had nothing to do with it, that Islam was a religion of peace, that the terrorists are misunderstood. You know, they were quickly going to give a lesson to Osama bin Laden and to al-Baghdadi, and you see other people who had a very thorough, intimate, inside knowledge of Islam. They were going to teach them what real Islam is, and that they had all misunderstood and so on. So outside forces are even more determined than Muslims themselves to keep on defending, to keep on whitewashing Islam. Well, nevertheless, you see, I don't see it happening in the near future, but the whole idea of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission is a correct one. You see, that's the spirit in which this problem of history has to be approached. And so in that, the work of Sitaram Goel is a path breaker. You know, it really shows the way. So in the story of Islamic imperialism, he quotes a number of primary sources of Islamic chroniclers through the Middle Ages, like for instance, what I have here is Firoz Shah Tughlaq, who was an Islamic ruler of the Delhi Sultanate in the 14th century. He had a chronicler, Shamsi Siraj Afif, who writes in the history, you know, his chronicle about Firoz Shah, namely Tarihi Firoz Shahi. The Sultan commanded his great fief holders and officers to capture slaves whenever they were at war, that is, suppressing Hindu rebellions, and to pick out and send the best for the service of the court. The chiefs and officers naturally exerted themselves in procuring more and more slaves, and a great number of them were thus collected. When they were found to be in excess, the Sultan sent them to important cities. So it has been estimated that in the city and in various fiefs, there were 180,000 slaves. The Sultan created a separate department with a number of officers for administering the affairs of these slaves. You see, like that, it's in a very sober, factual tone that Muslim historians themselves sometimes even the chroniclers themselves, wrote their own diaries, their own chronicles, like Babar. Just give all the facts that the historian might need, and lists all the cruelties that Muslims do. And it's in all kinds of circumstances, not only history books, it's also other types of writing where between the lines or in anecdotes, you find a very grim testimony of what happened. Like, for instance, Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan traveler and judge, describes how at the Sultanate court in Delhi, he is treated to the spectacle of the torture and killing of a number of kafirs, pagans. And, he excuses himself, getting sick from seeing all this cruelty. So this has nothing to do with an, objective description. It's very subjective. It describes his own feelings, but in passing, it gives an impression of what the Sultanate rule, what Muslim rule in general was like. So it is they themselves who give a description of the conquests, of the slave takings, of the mass rapes, and so on. Nobody needed to invent anything. In some of his booklets, Goel uses the translation made by two Britishers, Eliot and Dawson, in the 19th century. He does not always do this, not at all. He was very conversant with the primary sources. He knew Urdu fluently, and Persian he had learned in school. And so most of these works are in Persian indeed. And I stayed for a while in, one of the houses where he did his business. And so he had a room full of primary sources. And so he knew these very well. The use of Eliot and Dawson is to show that these things, first of all, are easily available, even to Westerners who don't know these languages. That the translation is already done. It's not that he himself interprets or overinterprets these texts. No, so this is already available. Now, this has led to a common criticism uttered, for example, by Romilat Hapar, that this is all colonial stuff, that is all colonial made up. Well, you see, Eliot and Dawson did have a certain intention in preparing this translation. They had a very colonial intention, namely showing the Hindus that they were better off under the British because the British had put an end to all this cruelty by Islamic regimes. Historically, that's not exactly what happened. The Mughal Empire, which existed in the 18th and formerly still in the 19th century, was essentially dismantled by Hindus themselves, not by the British. Of course, the British had been part of the story. But it's not as if this Mughal Empire would have continued indefinitely if the British hadn't come. You see, the Hindus were doing a good job at the time already. But anyway, the image they were creating was that Hindus should be grateful to the British and should be happy that the British had come. This is entirely true. However, that doesn't make their translation suspect. And indeed, I am still waiting for the first secularist historian who can show where exactly a translation is mistaken. You see, when the word, let's say the Persian or Arabic word to kill is used, like a qatala in Arabic, like kush in Persian, that doesn't lend itself to much interpretation, does it? So I mean, there's nothing wrong with the translation. I'm just mentioning it because in common sources, in Wikipedia and so on, you're going to find this criticism. In fact, the criticism is wholly beside the point. And so they are going into details like that, mainly because they want to hide the fact and distract from the fact that they simply can't find any fault with the contents. Then the second book here in this series is Heroic Hindu Resistance to Muslim Invaders in the period 636 to 1206. 1206 is the year of the establishment of the Delhi Sultanate. So that's when Muslim power really has arrived. You see, it is the institutional outcome of one of the greatest and most negative events in Indian history, namely the defeat on the battlefield of Prithviraj Chauhan, the king of Delhi, in 1192 at the hands of Muhammad Ghori. So that was a breakthrough. Until then, Muslim armies had been punching against, the borders of India. And so it starts in indeed 636, when a naval invasion takes place. This is only 4 years after the death of Muhammad. So a naval invasion takes place, which is easily repelled. Then the Sultanate in Damascus, Syria, sends invasion troops overland, one after another, and they all get defeated. So at one point, the Sultan, the Caliph curses the Hindus because they kill too many Muslims. So many Muslims, so many brave and so on Muslims are dying because of these expeditions towards India. But then in 712, finally, Muhammad bin Qasim succeeds and conquers more or less what is now Sindh. And so thus starts the story of Islamic imperialism in India. In present-day Pakistan, Muhammad bin Qasim is considered as the first Pakistan. This book is actually a very extended book review of a book by Ram Gopal Mishra, which deals with exactly the same Hindu resistance to Muslim invaders. And so Goel really retells that book and then gives his own comments on it. Namely that this book needed to be written because so many Hindus are under the impression that they themselves were powerless to do anything. Like the story of the British saving the Hindus, that was very commonly believed. Another one, variation on it really, is that the Sikhs destroyed the Mughal Empire and saved the Hindus and so on. There are many stories to this effect, like Tegh Bahadur giving his life for the Kashmiri Pandits, which is fictional. This is not true at all. Then, on the whole, the Sikhs did not rise in rebellion against the Mughal Empire. They were just ordinary people. There was one sect, like there were very many inside Hinduism. And so, of course, they steered a separate course from Islam. That's clear, but they didn't rise in rebellion. the strategic power equation was not such that this would have been a very good move in the short term. And so they did not do it. And any enmity that was suggested, for example, by the death of 3 of the gurus at the hands of the Mughals, was initiated by the Mughals themselves for various reasons. And so there were no Sikh rebellions, certainly no Sikh disempowerment of the Mughals. But the point is here that very many Hindus believe this. Oh, the Sikhs have been our protectors and so on. No, this is not true. You see, Hindus as such have a quite proud record of resistance. You see that they lost, and not even in the long run, they lost ultimately, but no, not ultimately. They lost after a long time. You see, it took like 500 years before the Muslims really got into India. 500 years of fighting. And even then, in the very long run, the Muslims didn't succeed. You see, under the Marathas, under the Peshwas, Hindus were finally staging a reconquest. And so this, it was here too early yet for a reconquest before 1206, but then already Hindus were showing their mettle. You see, Hinduism survived, whereas North Africa, for example, succumbed completely to Islam. Not only because of the enormous demographic magnitude of India, but also because Hindus were valorous and were very attached to their own civilization and were defending it. Then finally, Muslim separatism, causes and consequences. That's also a book review ultimately, namely of Seshadri's book, The Tragic Story of Partition. Seshadri was one of the high-ups of the RSS. And so his book really is warming the hearts of the Hindu militants, Hindu activists at the time, by recalling the story of partition and blaming the aggression against Hindus that took place at the time. Now here, I'm going to reveal something that is not in the booklet itself, but that was very clear in private conversations. Goelji didn't think very highly of this book. And so, you see, in an RSS publication, he couldn't afford to, be too straight about it. It would just not be polite and not diplomatic. But he believed that for all its detail, in telling the story of what happened during partition, of the massacres of Hindus in West Punjab and so on, the real diagnosis is not being made. You see, the root of the problem is not traced to Islam itself. At the time of partition, there was a slogan among the Muslims, Pakistan ka matlab kya, la ilaha illallah, meaning, what is the meaning of Pakistan? There is no God except Allah. So Pakistan stands for Islam. You see, this was disputed, at least not before Muslim audiences, but before Hindu audiences, by the communists at the time, who said, no, it's socio-economic and it has nothing to do with religion, and the poor, hapless peasants of East Bengal, you see, they deserve to be liberated from the ugly, vicious Hindu landlords, and and capitalist exploiters in West Bengal, and so on. You see, they were rationalizing this religious demand for Pakistan into something else. Well, you see, Muslims themselves were not at all fooled. They said that Pakistan is all about establishing an Islamic state. In the RSS parlance, even more today than at the time, it is emphasized that the Islamic religion had nothing to do with it, that Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the father of Pakistan, had been brainwashed by the British. This is a quote I literally have from the organizer. Jinnah was brainwashed by the British. The British instilled in him the desire for partition. Well, that is historically not true at all. The desire for Pakistan came about when the independence of India had become a distinct possibility. This is with the Purna Swaraj resolution, the total independence resolution of Congress voted in 1929. So on the horizon beckoned the idea of South Asia or Indian subcontinent free from British rule. And so at that time, Muslims had to make up their mind. And so they said, well, we don't want Hindu rule. And then there were two factions, one by Maulana Azad. This is well explained by Goelji in his book, that wanted the whole of India. And why not? You see, in the Middle Ages, Muslims were an even smaller minority than today, and yet they ruled India, or most of it. And so this was, you know, the more theological, the more backward-looking faction thought in these terms. Whereas Jinnah was a modern lawyer, was very British in his behavior, and he took the modern institution of democracy serious. And there the numbers are important. So he reasoned, well, we are not strong enough yet to take all of India. So we're going to settle for a part of it. And then in the long run, of course, that may be a launching pad for conquering or reconquering the rest of India. But let's start with a part of India. So those were the two philosophies. And then for a number of circumstances, Jinnah won the day. But so the motive behind this has always been Islam, and it's very explicit, and there are numerous Islamic testimonies to this effect. I mean, this is again a measure of the problem in India today, in India's political parlance, to which Goelji has devoted a book that we will later discuss, that this idea is even possible that partition had nothing to do with Islam. So H.V. Seshadri was a bit ambiguous about this. And in fact, this is often the case in organizing. You see a very correct Hindu stand against Islamic aggression. You know, also that there are many reports in organizer down to today about events that show again Islamic aggression or Islamic privileging in India over and above the Hindus. And so many of the issues that really anger Hindus are sincerely discussed and, you know, given attention. Yet the final step of concluding, you see, what is behind this, why is this all happening, that is generally missing or hushed up or
Yeah, looks like he lost his connection. We'll be back. Okay, if he's there. Let's see.
Hello.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
You're good. Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So, right. Okay. So Goalji goes to the source, and whereas Shadri points out the problem, discusses the problem, gives vivid detail about the problem, but ultimately doesn't give the clue, doesn't go into why this all happened. So there was a little difference of opinion there, but close enough. So you see, Goalji could recommend this book, only he added his own analysis of the sources of the problem to it. I said finally when I introduced this book, but I was mistaken because there is another, and in fact, perhaps the most important. This came in 1990, the book Hindu Temples, What Happened to Them? This was in the middle of the Ayodhya controversy. And so in the Ayodhya controversy, the BJP focused on one temple. And so they wanted the temple back, or they wanted to rebuild proper architecture on a mosque building that was effectively already used as a temple. But according to Goel, they failed to, again, go into the source of the problem. You see, Goalji himself saw the Ayodhya controversy as an occasion to educate the Hindu public about why there is this problem with Islam. Now, before going into the why and educating the public about that, first the facts have to be established. Now, in general, the facts have been established long ago. Also for outsiders, for non-specialists, like for instance through this 150 years old series of volumes translating Muslim sources, namely by Eliot and Dawson. And so very many things have been published about it. You know, if you don't want to be purposely blind, then you ought to know the facts already. But here we're dealing with one specific fact, that of temple destruction. And so in this book, he gives a list of a number of vandalized or destroyed or transformed Hindu temples who had to give way to mosques. This list has been mainly given the silent treatment. Why? Because the anti-Hindu historians have completely failed to pick even one hole in it. There is one particular temple that Richard Eaton, self-declared Marxist professor from the States, has tried to cast doubt on. There, Goalji immediately produced the primary sources. And otherwise, you see, all these cases have not even been touched. No doubt has been raised about them. You see, according to Karl Popper, it is typical of a scientific theory that it explains to you what you have to show, see, what you have to prove wrong in order to dislodge the whole theory. You have to give falsifiable facts, facts where the enemy, or well, the enemy, it's not that lethal a battle, but the adversary, the opponent in debate, where he can falsify what you say, where he can show you to be wrong. And so here you have like almost 2,000 claims, truth claims about specific temple mosque locations. For each of them, opponent historians can go and check out the facts and show Goel to be wrong. Well, this they have not been able to do in any case. No case at all. And they haven't even tried. So that's because of the truth of the matter. And here Goel shows, you see, what a historian should do. So we have the facts on the Hindu side. And not because Hindus wanted it, no, the facts have been there all along, long before there was a Hindu movement, long before there was an RSS, BJP, or whatever. And then in the second volume of this book, published in 1991, The Islamic Evidence, Goel shows, first of all, a number of primary sources giving testimony about how temples were destroyed. There are many, and they're often in very proud terms. Like, for instance, we know through these chronicles that the Somnath temple in Gujarat has been destroyed eight successive times. A long history of temple destruction. And we know all this from Islamic sources. There is very little by Hindus about what the Muslim invaders did to them. So now we are piecing this history, the Hindu side of the story together gradually, like with Meenakshi Jain's book about how Hindus try to defend or to restore or to protect or to spirit away the murtis, the statues, the images of the gods when they saw the Islamic army approaching. So you see, a lot of work remains to be done. Like, for instance, there is this booklet about the iconoclasm in Kerala. Kerala is hardly touched in Goel's list. So you see that information remained to be supplied. So someone local has made a long list of local temples destroyed in similar fashion. And Kerala was not even very much touched by Islamic invasion. It's mainly the work of Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan in the late 18th century that comes into focus here. But so even if there's very little comparatively of Islamic iconoclasm in Kerala, it's still a long list and not even complete. So, so a lot of work there remains to be done, but you see the essence of the story is already clear. And Goel then shows in this book not only that Muslim chroniclers themselves testified to all this story of iconoclasm, he also gives the reasons why. And the reasons are stated again by Islamic invaders, Islamic temple destroyers themselves. And so they do not refer, as secularists have tried to claim, to Hindu examples of iconoclasm. There are none. There are cases, a few, of one Hindu ruler stealing or robbing, abducting a murti of his opponent. But that's a totally different thing. You see, murtis were sometimes prestigious and rich and so on, in gold and whatever. And so they added to their glory by taking this murti. However, this was not a move against the religion. You see, if you take Shiva in your enemy's capital and spirit it, home and install it in your own temple, in your own capital, it means that the cult of Shiva is not touched at all. You see, the losers are perfectly free to produce a new murti, and the worship of Shiva continues. And the winner also, you see, venerates or worships the same Shiva in his own temple, where again the Shiva worship continues, but to a newer, more prestigious statue. So whereas in the case of Islam, the idea is to destroy religion. these murtis are destroyed in order to destroy Hinduism, which is all, very clearly, very emphatically humiliated on this occasion. So the justification that many rulers, when at all they feel a need to justify themselves, what they give is the reference to the Prophet's own example, which is what Muslims are expected to do. Islamic law means imitation of Muhammad. And so the great occasion in Muhammad's life was when he and his nephew Ali together destroyed all the murtis in the Kaaba. You see, from their base in Medina, they finally succeeded in conquering Mecca. And in Mecca, there was a Kaaba, a center of pilgrimage already for centuries. It's very much pre-Islamic. So they go there and there were 360 murtis inside. And so they destroy each of them with their own hands. That is the example on which the whole story of Islamic iconoclasm rests. So Goel goes into this and explains in detail this whole theology and so on. That, of course, is a story that many Hindus don't know about, still are reluctant to acknowledge, because you see, they are very happy about restoring the Hindu temple in Ayodhya nowadays, and they would like the topic to go away. Other Hindus, more militant Hindus, would like to re-Hinduize very many mosques built on Hindu temples, like, for instance, the Kashi Vishwanath, one of the most sacred places, has been replaced by Aurangzeb with a mosque. They would like to re-Hinduize that mosque, you see, have a big Kashi Vishwanath temple rebuilt on that very site. Well, you see, Goelji was in favor of restoring at least these three sacred places, the birthplace of Rama, of Krishna, and the Kashi Vishwanath. But nevertheless, on the whole, he was rather skeptical about a movement of reconquering what, in a certain sense, maybe not in a religious sense, but certainly in a strategic sense, are only toys. You see, each of these different temples, yes, it's important to worshippers affected, but in the larger picture, it is far more important to reconquer Muslims rather than Muslim places of worship. You have to bring back home all those who were abducted by Islam. And that ultimately is the practical goal of the ideological struggle. You see, first you show what is wrong, what is mistaken about Islam, and then you liberate, you see, those who are prisoners to this thought system. Bring back the Muslims, make them Hindu again. That's something you can't do. That's something you can only furnish the information for that would underpin it. Then the people affected have to decide for themselves. But so ultimately, you see, that is the right, that is the peaceful way. It is only if that doesn't work that perhaps at some point the security forces and so on may have to be called in. But so as long as you don't have Islamic terrorism and so on to deal with, you can simply keep it to the level of telling the story as it really is, as it has really happened, and then let people draw their conclusions. So that's what Goelji did in his work about Islam. In the next sessions, we're going to deal with a few deeper issues with Christianity, with secularism and so on. Thank you.
Okay, anyone has questions? Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment.
Yeah.
The whole lecture was very good. In particular, the beginning part. If we can take that message where if you don't fight ideological supremacy or aggression, it lead to physical aggression, which is what the Jews saw in the 20s and 30s in Europe. We need to somehow package that with good evidences and convincing, simple evidences, and go to the secular or on the fence Hindus, of which my estimate is, 30 or 40% of them are far left these days, at least the young ones included. 20, barely 10% are, on the right, and the rest are in the middle. We need to bring some of the middle to our side so we can actually fight this aggression. And that needs to be packaged. What you said is such an eye-opener and so truthful. But these 8 or 10 people that are on this call, it's like preaching to the choir. How do we, under your guidance, take that message and package it for the secular Hindu?
Yeah, well, part of the answer is institutional. You have to get your own people, or at least people who recognize these facts, into positions of influence. As documentary makers or as professors in universities and so on, where their voice is loud and clear and can be heard. You see, this is where, for instance, the fact of having a BJP government could have made a difference. But so far it hardly hasn't. Though I guess the atmosphere in academia, at least, is a bit more relaxed than under the leaden tyranny of the left under Congress and under the Janata rule and so on. I noticed myself in Madhya Pradesh, under a BJP government, I myself was nominated as a visiting professor in Sanchi University. Then it was elections just at the same time. Congress came to power. They put in a new vice chancellor who immediately had other plans regarding me. So you can see that to some extent, having a Hindu government is a good thing for advertising the Hindu cause and for writing truthful history. But still, I mean, given what Hindus were used to before, the present situation is relaxing and is more positive, is more open-ended. You see, more things can happen and can be said. But still, it has its limits. The BJP itself doesn't want to really get critical about Islam. They think that they would then antagonize the Muslims and so on. But yeah, I mean, this remains a very important part of the story. It's institutional. It's getting the right message on the right platform. You see, not just us on the side, in little online journals stating the true story, as was done by Goel in a time when it was even far more difficult. It was difficult to create the publishing house Voice of India. And then you could publish books, but it was even far more difficult to get the message out. And so that is already a little bit easier today. So this struggle is not at all in vain. But yes, I agree that the results of reaching the Hindu masses are very limited. You see, disseminating information through online media, for instance, that's nice, but it's nothing compared to having the education system in your hands. The education system, ever since Nehru and Azad in the 1950s, ever since the overhaul by Indira Gandhi especially, against which this book about Islamic imperialism is a reaction. A reaction against the official policy of history whitewashing. So if you have that system in your hands, you can do a whole lot. And so at the moment, this is still in a way in enemy hands. You see the textbooks and so on that existed under Congress rule are still there. It's not like there has been a great, cleansing operation led by the Hindu fanatics or the BJP. And so there's no such thing at all. And so that's a very important part of the story. Fiction is another part. Historical movies from Bollywood typically try to whitewash or even romanticize Muslim rule. Movies like Mughal-e-Azam or Jodha Akbar, they portray a sort of chummy togetherness of Hindus and Muslims, totally obscuring the reality of conflict. So there are many great historical topics for movies. Like I mentioned, for instance, the Battle of Bahraij, 1033. There, Salar Masud Ghaznavi, who was the nephew of Mahmud Ghaznavi, and who also conquered his part of India, including Ayodhya. You see, he confronted an alliance of Hindus, cobbled together precisely in order to defeat him. This was led by Sukhdev, if I'm not mistaken. And one of them was the famous philosopher King Raja Bhoja. And so you see, even though Hindus keep wailing, oh, we have no unity and so on. Well, there you see, having a common enemy, a number of different Hindu princes did get together and they defeated Salar Masud Ghaznavi. Now, you see, that's a great topic. You see, showing Hindu that unity exists, can be produced whenever it's necessary. There's no need to force unity on people. No, but when you have a common enemy, then you see you come together and it works. And you see, in this case, the Hindus defeated the aggressor. And so, you see, make a movie about that. Disseminate this knowledge. You see, many people are not going to read books, are not even going to read online articles, but they will watch movies. And so a large part of their worldview is created by the movies they watch. So, this kind of awareness can be spread, through means like this.
Okay, any more questions? Okay, all right, so we'll tomorrow we have the next session, right? So
Yes, exactly.
we'll continue tomorrow.
About prophetism, about the root cause of certain problems. And so Goelji did hardly worked on that, but the thing he did write about it is spot on. So we're going to discuss that rather thoroughly.
Okay. All right, thank you everybody joining. Let's just join tomorrow morning at the same time. And thank you, Dr. Els.
Okay, namaste.
Namaskar.
Namaste. Thank you.